Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Renata Dalaqua. It's a pleasure to welcome you today to the UNIDIR regional briefing on armed conflict and sexual violence, trends, analysis, and ideas for action. I am the head of the Gender and Disarmament program at UNIDIR. Today's event is a collaboration between the Gender and Disarmament Program and the Managing Exits from Armed Conflict project. Both are research programs at UNIDIR. And this meeting has a focus on Eastern European states. We're very happy to see here that we are joined by colleagues from the region. In particular, I see here Ms. Mateja Kavas, who is a minister plenipotentiary of the Slovenian mission here in Geneva. We're very happy to have her and other colleagues joining us today. The idea is to have, an exchange. My colleagues will present research and we would like to gather your feedback, comments and questions. So it's a sort of an informal conversation that we are hoping to have on a topic that is a very serious topic, which is the linkages between increased militarization, weapons proliferation, and gender-based violence. As we know, gender-based violence is pervasive in the context of armed conflict, and it can also persist even after a conflict has ended. Sexual violence coupled with impunity can even drive victims to join armed groups and continue the cycle of violence. So this is an issue of public health, an issue of social development, but it's also a concern for the arms control and the disarmament community. If weapons are used to commit rape in war, then clearly arms control and disarmament measures should play a role in the prevention strategies, both in sexual violence prevention, but also conflict prevention more generally. So I'm very happy that we have joined here today to discuss these issues. I am joined by two colleagues who will deliver presentations. The first is my colleague Bénédicte Santoire, Dr. Bénédicte Santoire. She has a PhD on issues related to women, peace and security. We're very fortunate to have her as part of the Gender and Disarmament program. She will provide us with an overview of the linkages between weapons and conflict-related sexual violence. And her presentation will be followed by a presentation from Anamika Madhuraj, who is an associate researcher coordinator with the MEAC project at UNIDIR. And Anamika will share insights from empirical research carried out with people affected by armed conflict and sexual violence in various contexts. These presentations will be followed by a Q&A, where we would like to hear from the audience regarding ideas for dialogue, for research, and for further action. After the Q&A, we'll have the pleasure to hear from Ms. Mateja Kavas of Slovenia, who will deliver concluding remarks. We are extremely honored by her participation. Before I hand over to the presenters, I'd like to note that this event is being recorded and it will be uploaded to UNIDIR's YouTube channel. So that will also be a chance for you to share this event with relevant colleagues as well. Now I would like to hand over to Bénédicte for her presentation.
Hi, everyone. Yes, great. So I can see, you can see the presentation well, right? Great. So, hi, everyone. My name is Bénédicte Santoire, and as Renata said, I'm a graduate professional at UNIDIR's Gender and Disarmament program. Thanks to you, Renata, for the introduction. And I also want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your day to be with us here. So I'm really excited to present to you the findings of my colleague Hannah Salama's report entitled Addressing Weapons in Conflict-Related Sexual Violence, the Arms Control and Disarmament Toolbox. Next slide, please. But before diving into the report's finding, let me just say a few words about the Gender and Disarmament program at UNIDIR. So our team's purpose is to analyze the gendered impacts of armed violence and explore how gender norms shape the role of weapons in society. In our work made possible by the financial support of our donors, Canada, Germany, Ireland, Malta, and Norway, we carry out research, dialogue, and capacity building activities that contribute to gender equality and improve women's participation in all areas of disarmament and international security. So it's very important for us to translate gender awareness into concrete policy action to help ensure that arms control and disarmament deliver for everyone. Next slide. So as you know, conflict-related sexual violence, so CRSV, is a complex phenomenon that has multiple overlapping causes, including gender inequality and enabling factors, some of them which are rooted in conflict itself. So one of these enabling factors facilitating and fueling CRSV is the proliferation of weapons, specifically small arms and light weapons. This is because, among others, small arms and light weapons, and in particular firearms, are weapons of choice by armed groups because they are relatively cheap and easy to traffic and hide. So for several years, the UN Secretary General and many states have recognized that increased militarization and the proliferation of small arms and light weapons is one of the factors fueling systematic and widespread CRSV. However, unfortunately, beyond this recognition, little has been done to address explicitly weapons proliferation as part of multilateral efforts to prevent CRSV. So I would say this was kind of the starting point of this report to address this gap and answer concretely how the proliferation of small arms and light weapons is linked to CRSV and how arms control and disarmament measures can be leveraged to better support CRSV prevention. Next slide, please. So UNIDIR's report drew on different kinds of data. First, a review of publicly available data on CRSV collected by different humanitarian actors, civil society monitoring projects, hospitals, and UN actors. Second, a desk review of relevant literature and UN normative frameworks and policies on the topic. And third, key informant interviews with practitioners and various experts, and a focus group discussion in Sudan that my colleague Hannah conducted with various actors on the ground. Next slide, please. So now the key findings, the report points to both direct and indirect links between weapons proliferation and CRSV. So first, on the one hand, weapons and ammunition are used by perpetrators to commit rape, threaten, or coerce individuals into sexual acts against their will, injure them, or kill them. As you can guess, there is very limited data on weapons and CRSV incidents, and there are also so many challenges in terms of data collection, especially when one wants to measure direct links. So hospital data from different conflict-affected regions are helpful in that regard. One hospital in the DRC indicated that between 40% and 60% of CRSV incidents recorded involved a weapon. According also to Insecurity Insight, which is a civil society monitoring project, in 2022, between 70% and 90% of incidents that they recorded in DRC, Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Sudan, Sudan, and Ukraine involved a weapon, specifically a firearm again. So this is a huge number. On the other hand, indirect links between CRSV and weapons are also present, and these links are in another way tricky to measure. So we know that weapons proliferation fuels armed conflict, which in turn propagates the condition leading to CRSV. So on indirect links, studies from South Sudan and DRC, for example, have shown that the same conditions that have led to increasing conflict violence, for example, increasing militarization and proliferation of small arms, also led to an increase in intimate partner violence. Likewise, most recently in Ukraine, so not only has the UN documented many cases of CRSV that were facilitated by weapons, but local CSOs also have documented a 400% increase in calls to the police about domestic violence in January 2023 compared to the same period in the previous years. In addition to the direct and indirect links between small arms and CRSV, the interviews with practitioners in the field also revealed additional links where much more research is needed. I think next slide, please. Yeah, that was too quick, sorry. But for example, criminal groups and armed groups in the trafficking of women and girls for sexual exploitation in conflict often take advantage of the breakdown of borders and the rule of law for financial gains. Another example also is the cross-border trafficking of weapons by criminal or armed groups, which may be used, which may be using, sexual violence to also coerce women into trafficking roles. And finally, mining areas in the DRC, for example, controlled by armed groups, are also often characterized by high levels of sexual violence, as these groups traffic illicit minerals to purchase weapons and sustain the conflict. So out of this research, UNIDIR developed the Arms Control and Disarmament Toolbox for both short-term and long-term prevention of CRSV, and that includes multiple treaties, instruments, tools, and measures to address the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Some of these tools, for example, include the Arms Trade Treaty, the ATT, the UN Programme of Action on Small Arms, and the Firearms Protocol, which all address kind of the legal and policy frameworks for small arms and light weapons control, and that can help support long-term prevention. It also includes tools and measures that can be relevant at different phases of a conflict to limit access to weapons to perpetrators of CRSV, therefore contributing to both short-term and operational prevention of CRSV. Next slide, please. So the role of certain arm control treaties and instruments is already mentioned in the UN framework for preventing CRSV. And with some of these measures supporting long-term and structural prevention. However, unfortunately, there's no multilateral arms control or disarmament treaty that specifically address CRSV. So the report suggests that the ATT actually may be one of the most important treaties for CRSV prevention, because the ATT already includes gender-specific language, and so CRSV should be considered under Article 6 of the ATT, which prohibits states from exporting arms to countries with widespread violation of international humanitarian law. So the toolbox also, next slide, please. The toolbox also includes tools and measures that can be relevant during different phases of a conflict, as I said, and these tools and measures include disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, what we call the DDR. civilian disarmament programs, weapon and ammunition management, community violence reduction, and SSR, so security sector reform. So all these can be leveraged at different points of the conflict, as you can see on the figure. And just to detail the figure a little bit more, for example, in the phase before the conflict, integrating arms-related risks in CRSV early warning systems, for example, could support prevention. Also collecting information on weapons in CRSV incidents inform prevention strategies, and this can also help. This can also happen, during the conflict. Engaging with armed groups on weapon issues during a conflict, for example, through the frameworks of cooperation facilitated by the Office of the Special Representative on Sexual Violence, could be another measure. Leveraging arms embargoes and CRSV criteria could limit weapons circulation and access by perpetrators. I'm naming many measures coming out of the toolbox, so you can have a better idea of how useful the framework is. But weapons and ammunition management also can strengthen physical security and effectively minimize the risk of weapon and ammunition diversion, which we know can facilitate CRSV. DDR and SSR, which already address CRSV, can go even further by addressing the risk in the disarmament component by including, for example, women in collection campaigns, raising awareness about CRSV, and also reviewing existing regulations on who can be given a gun license, for example, or whether members of security forces can take service weapons at home. So obviously, some of these measures that are present in the toolbox, like DDR and CCR, for example, are already in place in different parts of the world, but they're not always being implemented in a gender-sensitive way. So the toolbox developed by my colleague in the report is really like a practical guidance on how to implement practically all of this. Next slide, please. Thank you. So out of this report comes out different recommendations. One clear thing is the necessity of improving our understanding of the linkages between small arms and light weapons proliferation and CRSV through, for example, supporting more research and data collection in this sector, bringing more attention to these linkages in relevant multilateral forums. The report also shows the importance of putting survivors of CRSV, so whether individuals or survivor-led organizations, for example, at the heart of decision-making at all levels. And finally, it points to the need to enhance synergies between relevant global and regional frameworks tackling weapons proliferation, of course, but also gender equality. For example, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, or the SDGs, for example. Next slide. So if you're curious about the report and you want to know more, you can scan the QR code here and download the report. So I thank you very much for your attention and interest.
Thank you, Bénédicte. Hi, everyone. So as mentioned, I'll be sharing some findings from UNIDIR's Managing Exits from Armed Conflict project, or MEAC for short, based on our recent research in the Lake Chad Basin as well as Colombia. And as you can tell from our logo of logos here of our donors and partners, that we are an all-of-UN effort, and our project seeks to understand how and why people exit armed groups, and how they fully and sustainably return to civilian life. Next slide, please. So let me begin with the Lake Chad Basin. where we looked at the experiences of women and girls associated with Boko Haram. And this is a methodology slide. And just to give a very quick kind of intro, in the Lake Chad Basin, MIAC has been collecting data since 2020, and we've conducted 19 surveys so far, interviewing women, men, girls, and boys as young as 12. And alongside surveys, we do qualitative research to explore topics that are less suited for structured questionnaires. The findings that I'm presenting today are based on interviews and focus groups held between February and October 2024 in Cameroon, Chad, and Nigeria, with both former associates of Boko Haram as well as community members. Next slide, please. Yes, so on to findings. Our first key finding relates to forced marriages. We found that Boko Haram factions have been systematically engaged in sexual and gender-based violence, with forced marriages being extremely widespread. Girls, widows, and even married women were not spared. In Nigeria, 59% of women and girls in our sample reported being married while with the group. And many more than once. They've had to remarry after the death or capture of their husbands, which can mean, in practice, multiple forced marriages. Second, most of these women and girls remain married to their so-called Boko Haram husbands even after exit, over 80% in Nigeria. Unfortunately, legal avenues for divorce are rare, and economic dependence as well as fear of losing their children if they do divorce often makes separation quite challenging and impossible. And this really begs the question as to what reintegration can really look like if you're still married to someone from an armed group. And our third finding is that reintegration efforts are sometimes unintentionally reinforcing harm. In Nigeria, we observed that women and girls who exited alone were often held in transit centers until their Boko Haram husbands, so the same men that they were forced to marry, also exited from the group. And they were reunited by authorities with no clear indication of consent. And in some cases, assistance in transit centers were also channeled through men, forcing unmarried or widowed women to rely on male intermediaries, some of whom actually withheld a portion of that aid as payment. Our fourth finding is that many women and girls end up actually self-reintegrating, returning to crisis-affected communities with little or no formal support. Even those who surrender formally are often deprioritized because they're not seen as a security threat. And as a result, assistance remains geared towards men, despite many women caring for multiple children and facing extremely severe livelihood insecurity. Next slide, please. In terms of recommendations, first, we need to stop viewing women and girls exiting armed groups solely as victims, wives, or daughters. Many played diverse roles, fighting or providing logistical support in sustaining armed groups. And yet, DDR responses continue to overlook them. And to change this, we need to meaningfully include women and girls in DDR design through advisory mechanisms and even sustained support for grassroots women's organizations. Second, their socioeconomic independence must be prioritized. Reintegration often takes place in climate-affected, crisis-prone areas where women continue to face the greatest constraints. So support, could look like access to land and credit, climate-smart livelihoods, and financial and literacy training to build long-term resilience. Next slide, please. Next, I will go through our findings from Colombia, specifically with the NASA indigenous community, and they're based on the north of Cauca, looking at how sexual violence intersects with conflict dynamics. Next slide, please. So this particular research draws on interviews and focus groups conducted in July 2024 with community actors who have direct visibility on sexual violence and recruitment in the region. Specifically, the NASA Indigenous Guard, they're a community protection force, as well as leaders from ASEAN's Women's Department, which is part of the local Indigenous governance body. Next slide, please. Our first finding is that some survivors of sexual violence are joining armed groups in search of justice. This is because the mechanisms available in their communities, especially the indigenous justice system, often fail to deliver accountability. Survivors continue to face disbelief, re-victimization, and light or absolutely no penalties for perpetrators, leaving them with absolutely no support, redress, or protection. Second, these dynamics occur in a broader context of unequal gender norms and roles. And these norms shape how violence is responded to and continue to contribute to a culture of impunity. Third, community perceptions are deeply divided. So men in particular tended to externalize the problem, attributing sexual violence to armed groups rather than acknowledging its presence within the community and the role of local men in it. This denial, of course, undermines efforts to confront the issue and reinforces harmful gender stereotypes. Finally, while most survivors are women and girls, we also heard accounts of boys and men experiencing sexual violence. These cases are even less recognized and supported. Next slide, please. Our recommendations target both institutions and communities. For authorities, we recommend strengthening policy and guidance to improve how sexual violence cases are reported, tracked, and resolved. Confidential data gathering should also help assess justice outcomes and guide improvements. Institutions also, of course, need clearer roles and regular trainings, particularly when it comes to male survivors, to reduce stigma and improve case handling. At the community level, we call on members to report cases, provide support, and create safe spaces. This includes denouncing machismo, strengthening family support networks, and participating in efforts to challenge harmful norms and prevent violence. Next slide, please. So the findings from both Lake Chad Basin and Colombia that I discussed today are linked to these reports on the slide, which you're welcome to access using the QR codes in display. Thank you so much for your time and for listening, and back to you, Renata.
Thank you very much, Bénédicte and Anamika, for sharing these research findings. As our audience may have noticed, these were research projects that were conducted in parallel, but they do have a strong dialogue with each other. While Bénédicte presented more general understanding of how weapons and conflict-related sexual violence happened, Anamika presented insights and views from people affected by conflict and armed violence in specific context. One research was about Lake Chad Basin in Africa, and another research was about Colombia in South America. None of this was about the Eastern European states in particular, but we welcome the contribution of everyone who is in the call. If you would like, to turn your camera on, raise your virtual hand, or raise your physical hand, or type questions in the chat. We would like to hear from you. How do the findings of the reports presented today, how do they apply to your regional reality, to your context, to your national reality? Do you have good practices to share regarding, be it data collection that would improve our understanding, or practices to support survivors, or programs that have been helpful in preventing CRSV, preventing gender-based violence more broadly? We are very interested in hearing from you and learning from you. And also, UNIDIR, we are in the business of research. We welcome your ideas for research that could help us better understand the linkages between increased militarization, the proliferation of weapons, and sexual and gender-based violence. So we are here taking notes of your suggestions of how, we can advance these conversations. At the end of the day, we want to produce knowledge that can inform the action of states, be it at multilateral level or on the ground, supporting women and girls that are exiting armed groups, as Anamika mentioned, in the case of, women that were married to people in Boko Haram. How can we continue to support them and make sure they can exit such groups and integrate into, a post-conflict society. So now we have 15 minutes for an exchange. I'd be very keen to hear from the colleagues that are on the call if they see further areas for action, or from where they are working on, if there are particular processes where they see opportunities for bringing this issue. I mean, here in Geneva, we know there's the Arms Trade Treaty that meets regularly. In August, we will have the Conference of States Parties, and that's an opportunity again to continue developing further guidance on how to implement, the GBV criteria within the Arms Trade Treaty, and even perhaps make implementation more sensitive to risks of conflict-related sexual violence, for instance. So the Arms Trade Treaty is another, a very specific conversation that we have here in Geneva, but you may be aware of other opportunities in the region, or in Geneva, or in New York, or other multilateral capitals that we are not aware of. And we welcome your contributions. So for now, I just saw one comment in the chat from Ines, thanking us for the briefing. Our publications, they are always available on our website, so you can check the 3 publications that were mentioned here today. And we are often publishing new things as well. So, please stay in touch. Our research on conflict-related sexual violence, actually, we have a follow-up project, and the report will come out soon, which focuses on the roles of UN peace operations and how UN peace operations can update the way they work to better integrate policies related to arms control with policies and programs related to CRSV prevention. So that's a very concrete way in which we can advance this conversation, is looking at UN peace operations. But I'm sure there are other avenues for work as well. And if we don't have any questions from the audience, I will ask a few questions to my colleagues, to Bénédicte and to Anamika. When you were preparing for this briefing, both Bénédicte and Anamika, was there anything that surprised you as you were doing this research? What was, the thing that got your attention and you thought, well, this is different than what I expected, or anything like that that you would like to highlight? Any of you would like to share with us your impressions on this?
Maybe I can share something. I'll be very brief. I wouldn't say that anything, surprised me, but one thing that caught my attention was how helpful hospitals were in terms of data collection. Like personally, I never thought about, that, and I was really thinking how important. I think it underlines how important collaboration with health sector is in terms of data collection, because I never thought about hospitals, the roles that health sector and hospital can play in that sector in data collection. Also, one thing that made me kind of reflect, and I was doing connections with my own research and fieldwork I conducted in Ukraine and Moldova, is how much the synergy aspect between CRSV and other frameworks are important, like really explicitly including CRSV mention and prevention measures, for example, in national action plans for women, peace and security, is very important. And also, well, none of this will surprise you, obviously, but women NGOs and CSOs, civil society organizations on the ground, they know so much. Like in terms of data collection, they really need to be part of these initiatives. Again, I was remembering some cross-border collaboration between women NGOs and CSOs in Ukraine and Moldova, and how Moldova was receiving, for example, refugees, so and helping survivors of CRSV. So I was kind of reflecting on that. So I don't know if it answers your question, Renata, but just wanted to share those thoughts with the audience.
No, that's super interesting, Bénédicte, especially when you talked about the health sector, because for sure there are, first responders on the ground. But when we go to an international meeting on, weapons issues or on women, peace and security, we don't really interact with people from public health background, which is a pity. I mean, at least me, I don't get to see them often because they have such an expertise in this area, for sure, supporting survivors and delivering care, but also, building the evidence base that we need to make the case for stronger policies related to arms control and CRSV prevention. How about you, Anamika? Anything that you found surprising in the research?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the question, Renata. Maybe I can highlight one thing from Colombia and one thing from the Lake Chad. I think, yeah, in terms of something to highlight, maybe one interesting and unique thing with our research in Colombia, I think this is a promising practice, which is that our work there was, deeply participatory in nature. So we really engaged with the NASA community, working directly with the indigenous institutions there, like the OSCE, which is, as I mentioned, the little governance body, to not only co-design the research questions and implement, asking those questions, but then we also work with them to create joint recommendations in terms of ways forward. So I think that is a promising, interesting approach in terms of ensuring that we respect cultural sensitivity and whatever we design in the recommendations are context sensitive. And then for the Lake Chad, I think maybe one interesting thing to highlight is that, it's about how we understand exit from armed conflict. I think a lot of the DDR frameworks assume that once someone exits an armed group, their ties to that group, they're completely severed and completely dissolved. But for women and girls, who were forcibly married within the armed groups, we see that that's often not the case. Many remain legally, economically, and socially bound to their husbands that they were forced to marry within the group. And so there is this interesting question to think about, what does it mean to respect women's agency when it comes to DDR programs, and the fact that we must avoid this one size fits all assumptions. You know, some women that we spoke to, they wanted to end these marriages, but they can't because of legal barriers, because of, you know, fear of retaliation, because of losing custody of their children. But that said, there were also women who described their husbands as caring and supportive, and wanted to stay in those unions. So I think there's a lot of nuance when it comes to reintegration and exiting an armed group. And I think the primary motive of reintegration must be about restoring choice for these women and girls, and not imposing a path forward that we think is the right one, but, you know, accepting that nuance and creating conditions in which these women and girls are able to make choices for themselves and respect their agencies. So yeah, maybe those are some quick observations from both case studies.
Thank you very much, Anamika. And I agree, we can learn so much by doing this type of participatory research, where we, you know, humanize, you know, we hear their stories and we understand kind of the difficulties that they face. And if and when we can support people in terms of restoring choice, as you said, I think that's really key. We still have a bit of time. I would check again if anyone is inspired to make a comment or share some feedback with us. You can do so either via the chat or raising your hands. But if not, if the briefing is all clear, or if, you know, a question comes up later, you can always reach out to us at UNIDIR. Our doors are always open. But otherwise, I will pass the floor to the next speaker, who is, as I said before, Ms. Mateja Kavas. Mateja is here with us. She has an extensive career in Slovenia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where she held important posts in Ljubljana, but also in Washington, D.C., in Copenhagen, in Brussels, among others. During her assignment to Slovenia Permanent Mission to NATO in Brussels, Mateja was involved in the drafting of the NATO Action Plan on UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. So she has a very hands-on experience about bringing, you know, the WPS lens to her work. She does that also here in Geneva as part of the permanent mission to the UN in Geneva. And I would like to highlight that Slovenia has a feminist foreign policy and places gender and WPS at the top of their foreign policy priorities, which make us very happy to welcome here today, and always a pleasure to engage with Slovenia. Mateja, you have the floor.
Thank you, Renata, for your kind words and for giving me the floor. And good afternoon, all distinguished colleagues. As we conclude this vital discussion on the UNIDIR report addressing weapons in conflict-related sexual violence, I wish first to thank the researchers, in particular Hannah Salama, other contributors, and UNIDIR Gender and Disarmament team led by Renata, Dalaqua, for their dedication to bringing this pressing issue to light. Today's event has provided an opportunity for UNIDIR to share its research findings on the linkages between militarization, the proliferation of weapons, and sexual and gender-based violence. These insights are essential to shaping a stronger, more coordinated response to CRSV. We heard today that sexual violence remains pervasive in the context of armed conflict, and its devastating impact can persist long after the fighting ends. The report underscores that weapons not only fuel conflicts, but also directly facilitate CRSV, as it can be used to commit acts of violence, evoke fear, and destabilize societies. Publicly available data from conflict-affected areas, including Ukraine, reveals that up to 90% of CRSV incidents involve weapons, particularly firearms. History including in my own region, reminds us of the catastrophic consequences of failing to address these dynamics. During the wars in the Western Balkans in the 1990s, sexual violence was systematically used as a weapon of war, leaving profound scars in the society that continue to impede reconciliation and recovery decades later. Today, similar patterns are reported in Ukraine, highlighting the urgent need for action. The UNIDIR report presents a compelling call to integrate arms control measures into CRSV prevention strategies. The proposed arms control and disarmament toolbox includes treaties such as the ATT, the UN Programme of Action on Small Arms, and the Firearms Protocol, along with other measures within disarmament, weapons management, and community violence reduction. These tools can play, if further strengthened, a role in both immediate prevention and long-term efforts to change harmful gender norms, and with that addressing one of the root causes of CRSV. As we also heard today, CRSV is not just a public health issue, it is also a matter for the arms control and disarmament community, also in Geneva. If weapons are used to commit rape in war, then arms control must be part of prevention strategies. Equally critical is the need to respect and ensure respect for international human rights law and international humanitarian law, which is foundational to addressing CRSV and preventing such atrocities in the future. Let us remember that conduct of armed conflict has far-reaching consequences. Where sexual violence and weapons misuse go unaddressed, cycles of division and mistrust endure, hindering post-conflict recovery and stability. By prioritizing survivor-centered and human rights-based approaches, gender-responsive arms control and inclusive peace-building efforts can lay the foundation for justice, dismantling inequality, healing, and sustainable peace. In closing, I express my sincere gratitude to our panelists, Dr. Bénédicte von Santoire and Ms. Anamika Madhuraj, for their insightful presentations and their work, and to all participants for joining this important conversation today. Your further engagement is invaluable in advancing this agenda and ensuring that CRSV prevention remains a priority in global arms control and disarmament efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mateja, for sharing your perspectives and for joining us today. And thank you to Slovenia for being a champion of gender equality and women, peace and security agenda. We really appreciate your leadership and engagement. With that, I would like to close today's briefing. Thank you very much to our panelists, to everyone who joined. And I wish you all a good continuation of your day. And please stay in touch. Thank you very much. Goodbye.